course, I was showing the wrong screen. But in any case, welcome everybody. My name is Abe Bonowitz. I'm the Executive Director of Death Penalty Action. I'm also a co-founder of L'Chaim, which means life, Jews Against the Death Penalty. L'Chaim, Jews Against the Death Penalty, which is in partnership with the group in Louisiana called Jews Against Gassing, which has been articulating an opposition by the Jewish community to gas, suffocation, executions. And we have been in support of the various organizations that have been organizing opposition to executions resuming in Louisiana after 15 years. Death Penalty Action actually doesn't take a position on how we kill our prisoners, but the fact that we do kill prisoners when the system is as broken as it is. So I want to talk about that in a moment a bit more, but I do want to also just say that Death Penalty Action is glad to be hosting this. Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood is a member of our advisory committee. However, he is speaking for himself. Only Death Penalty Action staff and board members speak for the organization. But I will say we are aligned here on this and many issues. So welcome again. We're going to hear from Jeff in just a moment. I do want to share, before we begin, I want to share the position on gas executions of L'Chaim, Jews Against the Death Penalty, of which I'm a co-founder. And that position is simply this. Jewish tradition presents somewhat contradictory statements regarding the death penalty. And while the Torah permits the death penalty, the Talmud in the Sanhedrin imposes severe limits on capital punishment, even where the crime is murder. Contemporary United States law does not meet the standards for fairness and accuracy as articulated in Jewish law. And today we're not talking about the death penalty as a whole, but about this method of execution, gas suffocation. And certainly there are members of the Jewish communities in Louisiana and across this country and around the world who support the death penalty in concept or in practice, but we stand united in our opposition to the introduction of gas suffocation as a form of execution. We don't suggest any comparisons to the atrocities of Nazi Germany, under which millions of our relatives were murdered, many by suffocation in sealed chambers. But still, we can't imagine it possible that Jewish communities anywhere can stand by while prisoners are executed in our names using any variation of that mechanism. And of course, it is true that we've been killed in all kinds of ways. And again, Death Penalty Action doesn't take a position on the method of execution. We oppose the death penalty entirely for a variety of reasons. For me personally, it's a question of fairness. We are not using the death penalty nearly enough to be fair. And therefore, if we can't pick and choose who we're going to kill fairly, then we shouldn't be picking and choosing anyway. We should use the alternative, which in Louisiana and the rest of this country is death by incarceration. In any case, I'll also share that Death Penalty Action has been in leadership in opposition to gas suffocation legislation where it's been happening, and we have stood in opposition even outside the prison in Alabama for each of the 4 gas suffocation executions, and we do expect to be in Louisiana this Saturday. Sorry, they moved it to Sunday due to the weather, for the rally at the governor's mansion in Baton Rouge. That's at 2:00 Central Time on Sunday, and then, of course, we'll be outside the prison, and we're looking at other opportunities to engage the public and other communities in private while we were there from Friday through probably Wednesday. I will say that we were outside the prison for the firing squad execution that took place in South Carolina last Friday, and we will also be in Texas Thursday evening if that execution goes forward, and from Louisiana we plan to be going on to Florida. So there are 6 executions scheduled in March. We already have the one in South Carolina, then we have one in Texas Thursday night, then in Louisiana on Tuesday, Arizona on Wednesday, and Oklahoma Thursday morning next week, the 20th, and then Florida Thursday evening, the 20th. So there's a lot going on this issue. We're here as a resource to everybody about that. But today we're here to talk about the potential execution by gas suffocation in Louisiana on the 18th, next Tuesday. And to bring us up to date on that and what it could look like is Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood.
Thank you, Abe. It's hard to know where to begin when you're talking about something so horrific. We know that if Jessie Hoffman is executed a week from today, that will be the 5th nitrogen execution ever. Certainly, we know a few things about these executions. We've seen a few things happen in every execution. We've seen someone struggle to breathe. We've seen heaving. We've seen all sorts of body movements. Only thing that I can speak specifically to is what I've experienced and what I experienced as the spiritual advisor to Kenny Smith, which was the world's first nitrogen execution in January of 2024. I want to begin by speaking to how this process went with the state of Alabama. I think it's really important that the people of Louisiana know that nitrogen is an odorless, colorless gas that is deadly, not just for the condemned, but for everyone else in the room. One of the first things that happened when I accompanied Kenny Smith, or made the decision to accompany Kenny Smith during the first nitrogen execution, is that I was asked to sign a waiver, basically saying that if nitrogen leaked in the execution chamber, that I would not hold the state of Alabama responsible. There were real questions about safety. So much so that my lawyers and I went back and forth with the state of Alabama about what would safety look like in this circumstance. They didn't know, just like the state of Louisiana doesn't know. It's an experiment, and the state of Louisiana is going to be experimenting on Jessie Hoffman, just like the state of Alabama was experimenting on Kenny Smith. The closer we got to the day of execution, I was told that there would be oxygen monitors in the room. They were placed all over the execution chamber, and in the walkthrough before I got to the execution date itself, I was told to keep an eye on the oxygen monitors. I have no concept of what an alarm of one of these oxygen monitors would have looked like. But the fact that they were there states very clearly that there was a risk. And when you are using nitrogen, there is always going to be a risk of a leak. I want to move into what it was like seeing Kenny on that gurney. I came into the room. Kenny had a mask on, what was a firefighter's mask, the mask that is usually used in a nitrogen execution is a breathing apparatus that's very similar to what a firefighter would use. The mask went from the hairline all the way under the chin. There was a glass plate that covered the face, and it was pressed so hard against his face that you're able to see around the face raised skin, irritated skin, red skin. His even before the execution started, his face was very red, tomato red. The back of the mask was attached to the gurney to keep him from being able to move his head too much to the right or to the left. Kenny went on to give his final words. There was a hose that was coming out of the mask, and it went into a control center behind the gurney. When the execution started, you could hear a hiss come through the hose. And as soon as the nitrogen hit the mask, Kenny began heaving back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over and over and over again. And every time he heaved, the mask was catching on the back of the gurney. And so when he threw his head forward, resisting the nitrogen, trying to breathe, his face was slapping the front of the mask over and over and over again. And as it is slapping the front of the mask, there's fluid that's coming out of his mouth and catching on the front of the mask and drizzling down the inside of the mask. We're talking about all sorts of fluids. We're talking about snot. We're talking about various types of spit and mucus and sweat and all different kinds of things. And it truly looked like a waterfall in front there inside the mask. Kenny is continuing to heave. All of this stuff is catching inside of a mask. His face is growing more and more intense. His eyeballs begin to sort of poke out, bulge. He was turning red. It looked like someone had put a basketball pump in a tomato and just kept pumping until it kept growing and growing and growing. And that's certainly what I saw in his face. He was very much conscious. He was able to look at me, and I can tell you that one of the most heartbreaking moments of my life was to stand there and see this happen to someone and not be able to do anything about it. Underneath his skin, it looked like there were millions of ants. I mean, his skin was going in every direction. It was irritated in every direction. He was tensed up. You could see veins and all sorts of muscle and whatnot tensed up. He was pulling on the restraints. The gurney begins to slightly sway back and forth. The gurney is bolted to the floor. It's not supposed to sway. This went on for nearly 8 minutes. To say that it was horrific is an understatement. I began to see the guards start to shift towards the door. They didn't know what to do. They didn't expect this type of reaction. That was very clear. There was a regional director in the room with me from the Alabama Department of Corrections, and she was incredibly nervous about what was happening. From behind me, I heard from the witness room, I heard someone call out, stop, 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 please, stop, stop, stop. From 8 minutes to 22, 23 minutes, Kenny continued to breathe until they were able to arrive at a flat line there around 22 minutes. And in the midst of it all, Kenny seems to be going in and out of consciousness even after the heaving stopped. And it was absolutely one of the most horrific things that I've ever seen and perhaps might ever see. I've seen 9 different executions as a spiritual advisor. I've seen executions in Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama, and Missouri. And the 8 lethal injections that I have seen have no comparison to this nitrogen execution. I've said it then and I'll say it now. This is a moral apocalypse. This is something that it is unbelievable to me that politicians are pushing so blindly. Governor Landry there in Louisiana, he is out here promoting this execution method, and he has never, ever, ever seen this type of execution performed. The people in Louisiana who are shouting the loudest, saying that this will be efficient, saying this is what needs to happen, they have never seen what I have seen. I can think of no greater definition of the word coward than someone who would say, this is what you need to do, but I'm not going to have to do it. This is the horror that you have to engage in. This is the horror that you have to see, but I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to force low-level corrections officers to actually be the ones who carry this out. It is incredibly disturbing. After Kenny's execution, the victim's family in that circumstance came out of the chamber and told the New York Times that that the state of Alabama had lied to them and that they were victimized once again based on having to watch this execution. So I want to make something very clear to the folks that are here from Louisiana, just like other reporters I've spoken to in Louisiana. I want to make something very, very clear. We are not talking about politics. We are not talking about one's belief on the death penalty. We are talking about torture. We're talking about whether the people of Louisiana want to be responsible for what is about to happen. Of course, I have no knowledge of what exactly the state of Louisiana plans to do in terms of the details of this execution. But I do know one thing. I know that they are about to suffocate someone to death. And there is no possible humane way to suffocate someone to death. Lastly, I think it's important to point out that everyone that is in that chamber, including journalists, including witnesses, including corrections officers, the physician who is there, the clergy who will be there, will be horrified. They will be absolutely horrified, and they will have to deal with the same nightmares that I have had to deal with. They will have to deal with waking up in the middle of the night and seeing that heaving over and over again, seeing that face slamming up against the front of the mask over and over again. They will have to see the face, the eyes, everything bulging, everything moving everywhere all at once. And those nightmares, the trauma, the stress that everyone in that room will have to live with will be the fault of the politicians in Louisiana who have decided that ease and efficiency is more important than ethics and morality.
Thank you, Jeff. So as I put in the chat, of course, media is granted permission to record and broadcast this, just for the record. I also put in the chat a couple of links, including Death Penalty Action's petition about gas suffocation executions, and you can find our petition for Jessie Hoffman on our webpage. Also, a couple of links to reporters' narratives on this, in particular, the New York Times article that Jeff mentioned, in which the victims' family members who witnessed that execution discuss the horror that they experienced, and, as Jeff put it, as well as a news article about the third, I think it was the third gas suffocation, might have been the second, whichever, the Alan Miller gas suffocation, which was the second one. And So you can take a look at those. And now, if you have any questions, we're asking the media, our guests who are here that are not members of the media, please hold back. But you can use the Q&A, or you can raise your hand, and I'll give you access to speak, and then we can take your questions. Liam, go ahead. You'll need to unmute.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
We
Yes.
can. Thank you.
Dr. Hood, what do you say to one of these inmates on death row who will be facing one of these methods of execution as a spiritual advisor?
I mean, I have no idea what to say. I mean, that's like asking, and Liam, I mean, it's a great question, but it's like asking someone, how do you prepare to be burned to death? I mean, the only thing that I know to do with the guys that I work with is to tell them that God loves them and tell them that it will not last forever. But again, we are talking about a method that I can't imagine advising anybody to witness, let alone choose as an execution method. I mean, we're seeing this race towards nitrogen because one state and one state's attorney general has said this is efficient, it's cost effective, and I think that we are leaving ourselves with. I mean, what do you say? I mean, and I think that the people in Louisiana, if they had to witness one of these, I don't think they would ever do this, but this is going to be done in secret. It's going to be done in a way that very few people are going to be able to actually see it. Just like there's very few people who have seen these executions in in Alabama, and and then you start talking about litigation in which people are encouraged not to speak up publicly because there's a strategy in terms of from federal defenders, from other appellate attorneys that are involved in all these different attempts to stop this. I mean, it's just a really disturbing moment, disturbing situation. And the only thing, Liam, I know to do is to encourage my guys that they are loved and that it will not last forever.
Thank you for your testimony, Dr. Hood. That was very powerful. We all
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Liam. I appreciate it. I think there was somebody in the chat. It's Andrea. Do you want me to? I guess I'll read it. It says, this is Andrea says, Louisiana corrections officials testified last week that their execution protocol is nearly identical to Alabama's, and they visited Alabama's execution chamber to prepare for nitrogen gas executions in Louisiana. Should Alabama be an example for other states? Um, I mean, I don't even know like how to answer this question without multiple um, multiple horrific phrasings or analogies. I mean, the thought of Louisiana racing Alabama to the bottom. I mean, t tell me any circumstance in which Louisiana wants to emulate Alabama. I mean, if are corrections officials in Louisiana saying that they want to race to the bottom? I mean, that's what it feels like to me. Um, I think that when we're talking about um, visiting the chamber, I don't. I mean, of course, I don't. I didn't hear this testimony, but have they, Andrea? Do you know if they have actually witnessed an execution, or have they just been to the chamber? I can wait on your response. I don't know, but I
Hi,
can.
Dr. Hood. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Andrea. Sorry.
They said that they visited the chamber to like look at the equipment setup, but they did not witness an actual execution in the chamber.
Yeah, so Andrea, it's quite possible that there is no one in the whole state of Louisiana that's ever witnessed a nitrogen execution. I mean, how absurd is that? You're going to take someone's life, you're going to suffocate them to death, and we're talking about an entire state, politicians leading an entire state, corrections officials leading an entire state headlong into a nitrogen hypoxia execution, and they have absolutely no idea what they're talking about or what they're doing. And I mean, of course, I mean, you know, here in my home state, I'm in Little Rock, Arkansas, and here in my home state of Arkansas, we just had testimony about nitrogen executions in our legislature. And I think that what states are interested in is they're interested in bypassing the amount of money that it costs to secure drugs to keep doing lethal injections. That's very clear. But again, at what cost? At what cost? At what cost is Louisiana willing to forego in order to turn to barbarism? I think that what I saw in Alabama is, again, akin to the worst execution methods that humanity has ever devised. And so when, you know, should Alabama be an example to other states? I mean, if you're talking about an example of evil, then, and other people want to be evil, then yeah, Alabama's a great example of evil. But I don't think that's what Louisiana wants to be. And I hope that this execution next Tuesday is stopped before anyone in Louisiana is tortured with the horror of a nitrogen execution. Thank you, Andrea.
I'll just add that the only people who have said this works are state officials. Nobody else who has witnessed an execution, be they media or official witnesses otherwise, has described anything other than significant suffering by the prisoner being suffocated. And all we have to do is just think about a time when we were, you know, swimming and got stuck underwater for a moment and couldn't breathe, and the terror of that for a minute or for a few seconds, and then imagine that for minutes before you lose consciousness. That's what they're consciously doing. Other questions? Okay, I just want to take a moment to share this image here because in the Arkansas testimony, there was a statement that the masks were, you know, cheap and easy to get, and you know this retails for about $260 to $360. You can search it. Allegro Industries respirator mask. It's made by Allegro Industries, which is owned by a company called Walter Surface Technologies, which is out of Connecticut. Allegro Industries is out of South Carolina. We have been, as part of our petition, addresses these corporations, asking them to disavow the use of their equipment. You know, and actually there is legislation in Connecticut to prohibit the export of or profiting from the sale of equipment for use in executions. And clearly this is a life-saving device, as is, you know, as are the drugs that are often used in lethal injections. They're commonly used every day, some of them in hospitals across the country. So in any case, the point being that you know, we're not asking companies to not make these sort of things, just asking them to disavow, and if they can, to disallow the use of equipment that they make and manufacture for the purpose of that's directly opposite of why this equipment is actually produced. We have another question here. Nancy, Jeff, can you describe exactly your proximity to Kenny?
Sure. When I entered the chamber, I was able to touch him. I was able to get right next to him, which on some level was um, it was unnerving. I mean, the entire time it was unnerving. I mean, because what we were told over and over again is that there was this possibility of a nitrogen leak, and so you can't help but think about um, what the possibilities are, the horrific possibilities, and then you can't help but think about what you're trying to do here with Kenny. And I think that as much as it was a moral chaos, it was also sort of this chaos of consciousness. I mean, you're trying to keep your heart and your mind going in every direction. Um, when I moved back, I was probably less than 3 feet from him. Um, I was definitely the closest witness to the execution, and I mean, to the degree that I've spoken with journalists since then, and I've described things that I've saw, and they've said, "Oh, well, that makes sense that he was doing this then." The way that the room is set up there in Alabama, you can't see everything from the witness areas. Um, I think it's important, Nancy, just to speak a little bit more broadly. I think we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing to our clergy, pastors, rabbis, imams, by putting their lives in danger in order to live out their calling and their profession. I mean, that's what we're talking about. The state is putting clergy's life in danger um, in their pursuit of living out their calling. Um, let's see. So Nancy, there have been
You should read her question.
oh, sorry. So how can an inability to even know your spiritual advisor is there be of anything that the Supreme Court ruled was a constitutional right? So he is able to know that I'm there through the mask. There was a significant legal challenge before Kenny's execution, and there has been since then of whether or not he's able to speak through the mask or be heard through the mask. I also know folks in Louisiana. I also know that Jessie Hoffman has claimed that there is um, that he has a constitutional right to do breathing exercises and meditative breathing. Um, I can say that there is no possible way to be able to do anything like that in that mask. I mean, your face is so scrunched up that you're almost being suffocated before the oxygen. Excuse me, you're almost being suffocated before the nitrogen ever begins. It was very clear that it was very difficult for Kenny to breathe. His last words were rather muffled. And I know that that was also something that's been pushed around in terms of litigation. But I do think that it's hard to talk about religious liberty when you are endangering the life of the condemned chosen clergy in the chamber. It's hard to talk about religious liberty when you are muffling their prayers. And in my mind, it's very hard to talk about religious liberty in the pursuit of killing anyone.
Any further questions? Oh, here's another in the Q&A. Well, thank you, Nancy, for that. With that, I want to just thank everybody for attending today. I will note, especially for members in the media, that death penalty action will be on the ground in Louisiana starting Friday following the execution in Texas of a possibly innocent person there in Texas. There's a rally at 2 p.m. at the governor's mansion in Baton Rouge. We'll be there. You'll see many signs like this and T-shirts and other things that we will be bringing to allow people to express themselves. And then we'll be going on from there to to the execution in Florida, which is the same day as an execution in Oklahoma. And that's what we do, is help shine a spotlight on these executions and lift up every single one of them, whether they're guilty or innocent, no matter how they're being killed. Every execution should not be allowed in a government that has the four words carved into the face of the U.S. Supreme Court building: equal justice under law. That is not what the death penalty is, and that is not how the legal system works in this country. And with that,
I was going to say one more thing, and then we'll let everybody go. But someone asked me earlier today, you know, what should anyone that's in that chamber feel right now? And I said they should be terrified. Like anybody that is going to witness this or come anywhere close to this should be absolutely terrified.
and thank you all. Allie can end the live stream.